Get in. Yeah, it's a clear night. Where to? We're crossing the bridge tonight, Rio to Niterói. You can see the lights reflecting on Guanabara Bay. Beautiful city, tourist-friendly, safe during the day. But in 1991, Niterói had a problem. Boys were disappearing. Street kids, young boys, 6, 7, 8 years old, living rough, sleeping in alleys, begging for food, vulnerable, invisible to most people, and someone was hunting them. One by one, they vanished, and then they were found, dead, mutilated, violated. Their bodies showed signs of torture, sexual abuse, ritual mutilation. Some had organs removed, some were drained of blood. The person responsible called himself a vampire, not metaphorically, literally. He believed he needed to drink blood, needed to consume the bodies of children to gain their purity. His name was Marcelo Costa de Andrade, and between 1991 and 1992, he murdered at least 14 boys, maybe more, all between the ages of 6 and 13, all street children, all forgotten by everyone, except him. Tonight, we're going to Niterói. We're going back to 1991. We're going to talk about what happens when a serial killer targets the most vulnerable, and society only notices when it's too late. You ready? Good. Because this one doesn't just make you afraid of monsters. It makes you wonder how many monsters walk among us, unnoticed. Let me tell you about Marcelo Costa de Andrade, the vampire of Niterói, and the boys nobody was looking for. Who was Marcelo Costa de Andrade? Picture Niterói in the early 1990s, a city across the bay from Rio de Janeiro, connected by one of the longest bridges in the world, middle-class neighborhood, beaches, university. But like every Brazilian city, contrasts. Poverty existed alongside wealth. Street children lived in the shadows of shopping. Marcelo Costa de Andrade was born in 1967 in Rio de Janeiro. Poor family, difficult childhood. By his own later accounts, abused as a child. He didn't finish school, drifted between jobs, struggled with mental health issues that were never treated. By his early 20s, he was living on the margin, unemployed, isolated, increasingly disconnected from reality. And somewhere in that disconnection, something broke. He began having fantasies about children, about blood, about purity. He believed, according to his later psychiatric evaluation, that by consuming the blood and bodies of young boys, he could absorb their innocence, that he was a vampire, that he needed this to survive. This wasn't role play. This wasn't metaphor. He genuinely believed it. And in 1991, he started acting on it. The victim. Invisible children. Here's the thing about Marcelo's victims. They were street children. Meninos de rua. Boys who lived on the streets of Niterói, sleeping in doorways, begging for coins, sniffing glue to dull the hunger. These were children society had already forgotten. No parents reporting them missing. No schools tracking their attendance. No system protecting them. When they disappeared, nobody noticed. Not at first. Marcelo targeted these boys specifically because they were vulnerable, trusting, desperate for attention. He would approach them, offer food, offer a place to sleep, offer kindness. And the boys, hungry, cold, alone, would go with him to abandoned buildings, to empty lots, to places where nobody would hear them scream. And there, Marcelo would torture them, sexually abuse them, kill them. And then, according to his confessions, he would drink their blood. 1991, the killings begin. The first confirmed victim was in 1991, a boy, 6 years old, found dead in an abandoned lot in Niterói. Signs of sexual abuse, severe trauma, mutilation. Police investigate, filed a report, moved on. One dead street kid in a city full of violence, not unusual enough to warrant significant resource. Then another boy was 7 years old, similar mutilation, similar signs of torture. Then another. By mid-1991, police realized they had a pattern. Someone was targeting young boys in Niterói, someone with a specific victim type, a specific method, a serial killer. The investigation. Niterói police launched a task force, but they were facing a problem. The victims had no families to pressure for justice, No media coverage demanding answers, no public outcry. These were Meninos de Rua, society's forgotten. The investigation moved slowly. Police interviewed street children, asked if anyone had seen a man approaching kids, offering food, offering shelter. Some had. Descriptions emerged. A man in his 20s, average height, soft-spoken, friendly. Nothing that stood out, nothing alarming. By late 1991, the body count was rising. 8 boys, 10 boys, 12 boys, all between 6 and 13 years old, all found with similar injury, similar violation, and police still didn't have a suspect. April 1992. The arrest, April 1992. Over a year into the killing spree, a street vendor in Niterói saw something suspicious. A man, mid-20s, walking with a young boy. The boy looked scared. The man was gripping his arm tightly. The vendor called police. Officers responded, found the man and the boy near an abandoned building. The man was Marcelo Costa de Andrade. The boy was alive, terrified, but alive. Police questioned Marcelo, searched the area, and then they found the bodies, multiple bodies, in various states of decomposition. Young boys, discarded like trash in an abandoned building. Marcelo was arrested immediately. The confession. Under interrogation, Marcelo confessed, not reluctantly, not after pressure. He confessed eagerly, like he'd been waiting to tell someone. He described the murders in detail, explained his methodology, his beliefs. He said he was a vampire, that he needed the blood and flesh of children to survive, to gain their purity. He said he'd killed at least 14 boys, maybe more. He couldn't remember exactly. Some of the murders blurred together. He showed no remorse. When asked if he felt guilt, he said, "They were already suffering. I ended their suffering, and I gained their innocence." Psychiatric evaluations began immediately. The psychiatric evaluation. 3 psychiatrists evaluated Marcelo Costa de Andrade. Their conclusions were unanimous: severe mental illness, psychosis, schizophrenia. Marcelo genuinely believed he was a vampire, heard voices, experienced delusion. He was not legally sane at the time of the murders. Under Brazilian law, that meant he couldn't be tried in a criminal court. Instead, he was committed to a psychiatric hospital, Casa de Custodia e Tratamento Psiquiátrico Enrique Roxo, in Rio de Janeiro. Indefinite detention, until deemed no longer a danger to society. No trial, no jury, no criminal sentence, just hospitalization. And that's where the case became controversial. The controversy, the Brazilian public was outraged. 14 dead children, a confessed serial killer, and he's sent to a hospital, not a prison. Families of the victims, what few there were, demanded justice. Activists argued that mental illness doesn't erase accountability, but Brazilian law is clear. If a person is legally insane at the time of a crime, they cannot be held criminally responsible. They must be treated, not punished. Marcelo spent years in the psychiatric hospital, heavily medicated, monitored, interviewed repeatedly by researchers studying serial killers. He became one of the most studied cases in Brazilian criminal psychology. The release attempts. Here's where the story gets even more disturbing. Under Brazilian law, psychiatric patients can be released if doctors determine they're no longer a danger. In the late 1990s and early 2000s, Marcelo's legal team petitioned for his release. They argued he'd been stabilized, medicated, was no longer a threat. Public outcry was immediate. Protests, media coverage, families of victims, and advocates for street children demanded he remain institutionalized. The court sided with the public. Marcelo remained detained. As of the last public information, early 2020s, Marcelo Costa de Andrade is still institutionalized, still in the psychiatric system, still alive. The boys he killed, still dead. Their names, most of them, forgotten, because nobody was looking for them when they disappeared, and nobody remembered them after they died. The systemic failure. Let's be clear about something. Marcelo Costa de Andrade is a monster. His mental illness doesn't excuse what he did. It explains it, but doesn't excuse it. But here's the uncomfortable truth. He was able to kill 14 boys because society had already decided those boys didn't matter. Street children in Brazil, then and now, are invisible. They sleep in doorways, beg for food, sniff glue, commit petty crimes to survive, and society looks away. When they disappear, nobody files missing persons reports. When they die, nobody demands investigation. Marcelo understood this. He targeted boys society had abandoned, and for over a year, he got away with it. Not because he was brilliant, not because he covered his tracks well, but because nobody was looking. That's the real horror of this case. Not just the monster, but the society that created the conditions for him to hunt freely. Section 3. Theories and Analysis. There's no mystery about what happened. Marcelo confessed. Psychiatric evaluations confirmed his mental state. But let's talk about the why and the system. Theory 1. Severe mental illness. Marcelo was genuinely psychotic. He believed he was a vampire, heard voices, experienced delusion. His crimes were the result of untreated, severe mental illness. Evidence: multiple psychiatric evaluation, consistent delusion, no rational motive beyond his psychotic beliefs. The problem: mental illness explains the delusion, but doesn't explain the sadism, the sexual violence, the prolonged torture. Theory 2. Childhood trauma. Marcelo reported being abused as a child. Some psychologists believe his crimes were a twisted reenactment of his own trauma, that by victimizing boys, he was externalizing his own victimization. Evidence: pattern common in serial offender, cycle of abuse. The problem: most abuse victims don't become abusers. Trauma doesn't predetermine violence. Theory 3. Sadistic personality. Disorder beyond the psychosis. Marcelo showed signs of sadism. He didn't just kill quickly, he tortured, prolonged suffering. The vampire delusion may have been a framework, but the enjoyment of suffering was real. This theory fits the evidence best. Mental illness plus sadism plus opportunity. Yes, serial killer. Theory 4. Systemic enabler. Brazilian society's neglect of street children enabled Marcelo. If these boys had been middle class, from families, enrolled in schools, the first disappearance would have triggered massive police response. But they were street kids, so Marcelo killed for over a year before being caught. The uncomfortable truth: the system didn't just fail to protect these boys, it made them perfect victims. The unanswered question: how many boys did Marcelo actually kill? He said 14 plus, but couldn't remember. How many other serial killers target street children and go unnoticed? Why wasn't Marcelo's mental illness treated before he became violent? Should mentally ill serial killers be in hospitals or prisons? What happened to the families of the victim, if they had families at all? That last question is the one that haunts. Because most of those boys, nobody claimed their body. Section 4. Closing. We're here. I'm looking at Niterói across the water. The lights, the bridge, the beaches. Beautiful city. And somewhere in that city, in 1991 and 1992, 14 boys were hunted, tortured, killed by a man who believed he was a vampire. Marcelo Costa de Andrade is still alive in a psychiatric hospital, medicated, monitored. He's been institutionalized for over 30 years. He'll probably never be released. But the boys? Most of their names are forgotten. They were street children. Nobody's children. When they disappeared, nobody filed reports. When they died, nobody demanded justice. Marcelo was caught by accident because a street vendor happened to notice something wrong. Not because of a massive investigation. Not because of public pressure. By accident. That's the real horror. Not that a monster existed, but that he could hunt openly for over a year. Because his victims were children, society had already decided didn't matter. The meter's off. Niterói is quiet tonight, and somewhere in Brazil, right now, there are street children sleeping in doorway, hungry, alone, vulnerable, still invisible, still forgotten, just like the boys Marcelo killed. There's an ancient principle about the vulnerable, that societies are judged, truly judged, not by how they treat the powerful, but by how they treat the powerless, the orphan, the widow, the stranger, the forgotten. Brazil's street children are the forgotten. Meninos de rua, children without families, without homes, without protection. And Marcelo Costa de Andrade understood something dark, that nobody would look for. There's a truth woven into existence, that every life has value, that children, especially children, are sacred, that harming them is among the gravest violations. Marcelo violated that truth 14 times, at least, and he did it because Brazilian society had already decided those boys had no value. They were street kids, thieves, beggars, nuisances, not children, not sacred, not worth protecting. Ancient wisdom says that those who harm children face the severest judgment, that their guilt is unshakable, that what they've done cannot be undone. Marcelo is institutional, medicated, will likely never leave. That's something. But it's not justice, because justice would have meant protecting those boys before Marcelo found them. Justice would have meant a society saw them as children, not as invisible nuisance. Justice would have meant someone, anyone, noticing when they disappeared. I think about the boy who was rescued, the one the street vendor saw, the one who survived. What happened to him? Did he go back to the streets? Did someone take him in? Did he get help? Or did he just disappear back into the invisibility of street life? I don't know. And that's the problem. We don't know, because nobody tracks these kids. Nobody protects them. Nobody even sees them. Ancient wisdom tells us to protect the vulnerable, to speak for those who can't speak for themselves, to stand between the predator and the prey. Brazilian society failed those 14 boys, not just by failing to catch Marcelo sooner, but by creating the conditions where boys like them are invisible, where their disappearances don't trigger alarm, where their deaths barely make the news. Hey, thanks for taking this ride with me tonight. This one's hard, I know, because it's not just about a serial killer. It's about the kids he killed, and the fact that most of their names, we don't even know them. If this case affected you, if you're angry that society allowed this to happen, if you think street children deserve better, if you believe every child matters, hit that like button. Subscribe for more stories that expose not just criminals, but the systems that enable them. Drop a comment. Tell me what you think about Brazil's street children, about mental health and criminal responsibility, about how we protect the most vulnerable. I read every one, and here's what I want to leave you with. Street children still exist in Brazil, in Niterói, in Rio, in São Paulo, everywhere. They're still invisible, still vulnerable. Organizations exist that try to help them. Shelters, food program, education initiative. If this story moved you, support them. Donate, volunteer, advocate, because the best way to prevent another Marcelo is to make sure there are no more invisible children for predators to hunt. Next case, new story, same cab. Until then, see the invisible, protect the vulnerable, and remember, every child, every single child, matters.